What if one of history's greatest minds wrestled with life's deepest question and actually found the answer? What if, after reaching the pinnacle of success, amassing fame, wealth, and literary immortality, one of the most celebrated authors the world has ever known was struck by a terrifying realization? None of it mattered. Imagine standing at the summit of human achievement, only to feel an unbearable emptiness creeping in. Imagine having the world at your feet, yet feeling as though you are sinking into an abyss of meaninglessness. This is not just the story of a brilliant writer. This is the untold story of a man who had everything, yet felt nothing. A restless mind that refused to be silenced. A soul that could not be satisfied with superficial pleasures or temporary triumphs. A man who, after plummeting into the darkest depths of existential despair, clawed his way back with a revelation so earth-shattering, so transformative, that it not only redefined his entire existence, but holds the power to change ours as well. Who was this man? He was Leo Tolstoy, the literary genius, the tormented seeker, the man who cracked the code to life's meaning. And his journey may just hold the answers you've been searching for, the legend behind the pen. Leo Tolstoy, the name itself evokes images of literary brilliance, grand epics, and profound philosophical depth. The legendary author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina is revered as one of the greatest novelists of all time, a master of storytelling whose works continue to shape literature and thought centuries after his death. His novels are not just stories. They are living, breathing explorations of human nature, filled with intricate characters, sweeping historical narratives, and reflections on love, war, morality, and fate. He was admired by intellectuals, adored by readers, and envied by writers. His genius was undeniable, his influence immeasurable, yet, for all the reverence he commanded, Tolstoy harbored a secret that few knew. Beneath his brilliance lay a torment that no amount of literary success could silence. Tolstoy was haunted by the ultimate question: what is the meaning of life? Despite achieving everything a writer or any human being could desire, Tolstoy found himself consumed by an insatiable emptiness. The accolades, the praise, the wealth, none of it fulfilled him. The very success that should have been his greatest triumph felt like a hollow illusion. He had a loving family, a vast estate, and immortality through his works. By society's standards, he had won the game of life. But instead of basking in satisfaction, he felt an unsettling truth creeping in. None of it mattered. If anything, the more he achieved, the more meaningless everything seemed. This wasn't just a fleeting midlife crisis or a temporary spell of doubt. This was a chasm, a deep, existential abyss that threatened to consume him entirely. His mind, which had once created worlds of war and love, suffering and redemption, now turned against him, demanding answers that logic and reason could not provide. What good was fame if death would erase his name from history? What good was wealth if it could not buy peace? What good was knowledge if it only deepened his despair? Tolstoy had spent his life writing about the human condition. Now he was drowning in it. A crisis that changed everything. For Tolstoy, this was no ordinary sadness, no passing cloud of melancholy that could be brushed aside with distraction or indulgence. What he faced was something far darker, a full-blown existential collapse. He was no longer simply questioning life's meaning. He was being consumed by the absence of it. If everything ends in death, then what is the point of anything? This single thought became an obsession, an inescapable loop in his mind. It followed him through the halls of his grand estate, lurked in the silence of the night, and poisoned even the simplest joys of life. It robbed him of peace, stripped him of purpose, and made everything, his work, his success, his very existence, feel unbearably hollow. No amount of wealth could buy an answer. No literary triumph could silence the question. It was as if he had reached the peak of a mountain, only to realize there was nothing at the top. A world without meaning, Tolstoy began to see the people around him in a new, unsettling light. His fellow aristocrats, intellectuals and artists, the so-called elite of society, were just as lost as he was. They numbed themselves with luxury, drowning in excess while carefully avoiding life's most important question. They distracted themselves with art, politics and social games, never daring to confront the terrifying emptiness beneath it all. Tolstoy envied no one in these circles. Instead, he found himself drawn to those he had once overlooked, the peasants, the workers, the simple folk who toiled in the fields from dawn till dusk. They had no wealth, no access to grand libraries or philosophical debates, no lofty discussions of art, literature or existentialism, and yet they lived with a peace and certainty that eluded him. How could this be? Why did those who had nothing seem to possess the one thing Tolstoy, with everything, could not find? What secret did they hold? What truth did they know that had escaped him? This realization shook him to his core. It forced him to ask the most painful question of all. Have I been looking for meaning in the wrong place all along? The search for truth. Tolstoy was not the kind of man to accept defeat, not even in the face of existential ruin. He needed answers. Desperate, he threw himself into an intellectual and spiritual quest, devouring every book, every idea, every philosophy that might hold a solution. He turned to science, to rationalism, to the greatest thinkers in history: Plato, Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. He studied their works, searching for a truth that would restore his will to live. But instead of clarity, he found more questions. Science explained how the world worked, but it could not tell him why it mattered. Philosophy provided endless debates but no certainty. Logic led only to cold conclusions, that life had no inherent meaning and death would erase all things. If that was true, then why did he still feel that there had to be something more? The more he read, the darker his thoughts became. The fear of meaninglessness turned into despair, and despair turned into something even more dangerous: the thought of ending his own life. This was Tolstoy's breaking point, and it was at this very edge, the precipice of total darkness, that he stumbled upon an answer so profound, so unexpected, that it would not only change his life, but the course of history itself. The search for truth begins. Tolstoy was a man of immense intellect and insatiable curiosity, and when confronted with the most terrifying question of all, what is the meaning of life? He did what any great mind would do. He searched for answers. He turned first to the towering figures of philosophy, hoping that the greatest thinkers in history had already cracked the code. Surely, within the pages of their works, he would find a guiding light, a truth so undeniable that it would banish his despair. He devoured Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, seeking wisdom in their words, desperate for something that would provide a solid foundation for existence. He spent hours in his study, buried in books, chasing enlightenment through endless pages of dense philosophy. But the more he read, the more disillusioned he became, a labyrinth of questions. For every answer he uncovered, 10 more questions arose. The cold logic of rationalist thinkers left him empty. They offered explanations for how the world worked, but none for why it mattered. Science told him that human life was a mere accident of evolution, a series of chemical reactions firing within a biological machine. It reduced love, art, and human connection to nothing more than survival mechanisms. Could that really be all there was? Tolstoy recoiled at the idea. He had spent his life writing about human passion, sacrifice, war, redemption, suffering, beauty. He had felt these things deeply, witnessed them firsthand. He knew in his soul that life could not be meaningless. But if it wasn't meaningless, then what was it? No philosopher, No scientist, no intellectual had been able to give him an answer that satisfied both his reason and his heart. And without that answer, the weight of existence grew unbearable. The abyss beckons. The thought began as a whisper, creeping in at the edges of his mind. What if life is truly meaningless? What if there is no purpose? What if all of this, the love, the suffering, the victories and defeats, amounts to nothing? At first he tried to push it away, but the thought refused to leave. It grew louder, more insistent, until it became an obsession. Tolstoy had reached the breaking point. If life had no meaning, then why continue living? The idea of going on without an answer became unbearable. Death, once a distant inevitability, now loomed as a possible escape. He began to spiral deeper into despair. The walls of his grand estate felt like a prison. His achievements, his wealth, his fame, none of it could shield him from the truth he feared most, that perhaps there was nothing to live for. And for the first time, Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest minds in history, considered the unthinkable. Would it be better to end his life than to live without purpose? The unexpected revelation. At the very edge of despair, standing at the precipice of meaninglessness, something miraculous happened. Tolstoy had exhausted every avenue of intellectual pursuit, every grand philosophical theory, and every rational explanation, yet none had been able to provide what he sought, a reason to keep going. Just as he teetered on the brink of hopelessness, he turned his gaze toward those he had never truly seen before, the peasants, the farmers who tilled the land from sunrise to sunset, the workers who labored without complaint, the simple men and women who had none of his luxuries, none of his wealth, none of his literary prestige, and yet they were at peace. They did not agonize over the meaning of life. They did not spend their nights haunted by existential dread. They did not question whether life was worth living. They simply lived. A life without doubt. Tolstoy watched them closely, trying to understand their secret. What did they have that he didn't? These were people who had suffered. They had endured hunger, loss, hardship, and the harsh realities of peasant life. And yet, they did not despair. They did not crumble beneath the weight of existence as he had. Instead, they accepted life, its joys, its sorrows, its mysteries, with a quiet, unwavering strength. They did not demand absolute knowledge. They did not require logical proof of life's meaning. They had faith, faith in God, faith in their place in the world, faith that their lives, no matter how small in the grand scheme of things, had meaning. And for the first time, Tolstoy considered the possibility that the answer he had been seeking, the one that had eluded the greatest philosophers, the one that had driven him to the edge of despair, was not to be found in endless intellectual debate. Perhaps the key to meaning was not complexity, but simplicity. Perhaps it was not found in endless questioning, but in believing. Perhaps it was not found in isolation and intellectual pursuit, but in connection to others, to purpose, to something greater than oneself. A truth that changed everything. This revelation did not strike him like a lightning bolt. It did not arrive in the form of an epiphany that erased all his doubts overnight, but a seed had been planted. For the first time, Tolstoy saw a path forward, not one built on endless reasoning, but on acceptance, faith, and the profound wisdom of simple living. And that realization would change the course of his life forever. Faith. The missing piece. Faith had always been a subject of skepticism for Tolstoy. He had long dismissed organized religion as an institution of control and superstition. But now he saw something deeper, a faith that was not rooted in dogma, but in a way of life, a moral compass, a connection to something greater than oneself. He saw that the happiest, most content people were those who lived for something beyond themselves, whether it was their families, their communities, or a higher spiritual purpose. This was the missing piece. This was what the philosophers and intellectuals had failed to grasp. Meaning was not something to be discovered through logic. It was something to be lived through purpose. A new path forward. With this revelation, Tolstoy underwent a radical transformation. He abandoned his aristocratic lifestyle, gave up his wealth, and devoted himself to a life of simplicity, morality, and spiritual reflection. His newfound beliefs led him to champion non-violence, spiritual awakening, and a philosophy of love and humility, ideas that would later inspire great figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. His life, once consumed by despair, now overflowed with purpose. He had cracked the code to life's meaning, not through intellectual achievement, but through faith, service, and selfless love. Why Tolstoy's journey matters today. Tolstoy's existential struggle is more relevant now than ever before. In an age of endless distractions, social media validation, and material obsession, more people than ever are experiencing the same crisis Tolstoy did. Depression, anxiety, and a sense of meaninglessness are at an all-time high. His story serves as both a warning and a guide. It challenges us to ask ourselves, are we chasing success at the cost of our own inner peace? Are we seeking meaning in the wrong places? Can we find fulfillment not in what we achieve, but in how we live? The ultimate lesson. Tolstoy's story teaches us a profound truth. Meaning is not something we find, it is something we create. It is found not in wealth, fame, or intellectual superiority, but in how we live, how we love, and what we choose to believe in. Tolstoy went from the depths of despair to a life of profound purpose, and his journey serves as a timeless roadmap for anyone seeking to answer life's greatest question. So, are you ready to embark on your own search for meaning? Because the answer Tolstoy found may just change your life too.